A rapist, a pedophile, a groomer, a kidnapper, a cult leader? A man obsessed with prophecy. A guy single-handedly responsible for Robert's rebellion. A guy single-handedly responsible for the deaths of Elia Martell, Rhaegar Targaryen, and Aegon Targaryen. Throw a stone if you hadn't seen these accusations thrown at Rhaegar Targaryen. By a certain portion of this fandom, Rhaegar is like the devil incarnate, responsible for every single bad thing that has ever happened to anyone. Someone will stub their toe in the reach and Rhaegar will get the blame for it. I too at some point believed in all these accusations, though I was, and still am, pretty indifferent towards Rhaegar, all things considered. However, because the hatred towards him often stems from the hatred of Daenerys, and because this hatred often stems from intentional misreading of the story, which, as you probably know, I despise more than anything, I still feel the need to dive deep into perhaps the most mysterious character in the entire series, who seems to haunt the narrative despite being dead for years. What if I told you that 90% of the perception of Rhaegar Targaryen by the general audience is totally wrong? The circumstances of Rhaegar's birth put a shade on his entire life later on. Namely, Rhaegar, a son of Rhaegar and Elia Targaryen, was born during the tragedy in Summerhall, a big fire that killed numerous people. As the flames were ravaging the castle, Rhaegar gave birth to Rhaegar. Famously, Rhaegar's birth happened after a series of miscarriages, stillbirths, and other pregnancy problems faced by Rhaegar and Eris. As a young boy, Rhaegar was disinterested in fighting, but at some point he read something in a scroll that convinced him to take up the arts of knights and quickly became a skilled warrior, and though he would participate in tournaments every once in a while, he did not derive much joy from it. Rhaegar was a quite enigmatic and melancholic person and didn't have many close friends. His closest companion was Sir Arthur Dane, sworn to the Kingsguard. He was also pretty close with his squires, Miles Mouton and Richard Lonmouth, as well as John Connington. Otherwise, he was a solitary person and was described as being haunted by grief, having an aura of sadness around him. In spite of the circumstances of his birth, the ruins of Summerhall were Rhaegar's favorite place. Rhaegar was a musician and played the harp, and would often compose sad songs when he was spending time alone in Summerhall. Tywin Lannister had desperately wanted to betroth his daughter Cersei to Rhaegar, but was refused by Aerys. Rhaegar had no sisters or cousins that he could marry, so Aerys sent Steffon Baratheon to find a bride for him in Essos, where the blood of old Valyria was still present, but did not find a good enough match. Rhaegar was eventually betrothed to the Dornish princess Elia Martell. At this point, the relationship between Aerys and Rhaegar was already pretty strained. Rhaegar and Elia had 2 children, Rhaenys and Aegon, and their births put a lot of strain on Elia. It quickly became clear that she could not have any more children. Rhaegar believed that his son is the prince that was promised, since a red comet was seen above King's Landing when Aegon was conceived. The relations between Aerys and Rhaegar further deteriorated, and the conflict seemed to resemble what was happening at court right before the Dance of the Dragons. In 280 AC, a tournament in Harrenhal was organized, and some people theorized that it was a cover-up by Rhaegar to meet the Great Lords and get rid of Aerys. The plans for the conspiracy did not come to fruition because Varys alerted Aerys, causing him to attend in spite of his worsening paranoia. During the tourney, a mysterious Knight of the Laughing Tree defended the honor of young Holanrid, and Aerys sent Rhaegar to uncover his identity. Now, it is pretty clear to me that the Knight of the Laughing Tree was Lyanna Stark, and this is how she and Rhaegar met. Rhaegar was unstoppable during the tourney and was eventually its winner. When he was to crown the Queen of Love and Beauty, instead of choosing his wife Elia of Dorne, he put the flower crown of winter roses on Lyanna's lap, roses that she was especially fond of. It was the moment when all the smiles died. About a year later, Rhaegar seemingly kidnapped Lyanna, which indirectly kick-started Robert's rebellion. Some believe that Rhaegar spent the beginning of Robert's rebellion with Lyanna Stark at the Tower of Joy in Dorne. Rhaegar left Lyanna in the tower with 3 Kingsguard members, and he himself took control of the Targaryen army after the defeat of Jon Connington in the Battle of the Bells. Rhaegar met Robert Baratheon in combat during the Battle of the Trident. Rhaegar, despite wounding Robert, was struck down with a massive blow with Robert's warhammer. Rhaegar died with a woman's name on his lips. Rhaegar's wife Elia and their children were murdered by Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Amory Lorch during the sack of King's Landing. Amory stabbed Rhaenys to death, and Gregor killed Aegon by bashing his head against the wall while his mother watched. He then raped and killed Elia while still covered in the blood and brains of her son. Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister killed Rhaegar's father. When Ned Stark, Lyanna's brother, arrived at the Tower of Joy, Lyanna was dying in the bed of blood, and the last thing she did was ask Ned to promise her something. The contents of this promise have not been directly revealed, but it is obvious that Lyanna died in childbirth. Her child was Jon Snow, and Lyanna asked him to protect the babe from Robert's wrath. Ned then took Jon to Winterfell and raised him pretending that he is his bastard. The circumstances of Rhaegar's taking of Lyanna and her reaction to it are unknown. Brandon Stark saw it as an abduction, and Robert Baratheon imagined that Rhaegar was raping Lyanna while he kept her prisoner. However, the Targaryen tradition sees Rhaegar acting out of love for Lyanna. Lord Eddard Stark, Lyanna's brother, never makes a particular comment about it, even though we have his point of view, and curiously he never thinks a bad word about him. Rhaegar's last words was a woman's name. Was it the name of his wife Elia or Lyanna? Well, it just so happens that I have a source of George R.R. Martin directly stating that the woman's name was Lyanna. Which to me creates a pretty interesting situation, because we know that this happened right after his duel with Robert, so there is a high likelihood that Robert heard what Rhaegar said. In the current timeline, Robert constantly talks about how much he hates Rhaegar and how he believes he was raping Lyanna all the time, and yet in A Game of Thrones he says this: "I was always strong. No one could stand before me, no one. How do you fight someone if you can't hit them?" Confused, the king shook his head. Rhaegar won't damn him. I killed him, Ned. I drove the spike right through that black armor into his black heart, and he died at my feet. They made up songs about it. Yet somehow he still won. He has Lyanna now, and I have her. I'm not entirely sure if Fight of the Seven has some belief in heaven, but considering Robert's words, they seem to have some sort of afterlife. And why would Lyanna be in the afterlife with Rhaegar, who supposedly kidnapped and raped her? Why would Robert say that he has her? See, to me it seems like a Freudian slip. I believe that Robert, deep inside, knew the truth about Lyanna and Rhaegar. Lyanna and Robert were betrothed, but Lyanna was not particularly happy about it. Robert will never keep to one bed, Lyanna told him at Winterfell, on the night long ago when their father had promised her hand to the young Lord of Storm's End. I hear he has gotten a child on some girl in the Vale. Ned had held the babe in his arms. He could scarcely deny her, nor would he lie to his sister, but he had assured her that what Robert did before the betrothal was of no matter, that he was a good man and true, who would love her with all his heart. Lyanna had only smiled. Love is sweet, dearest Ned, but it cannot change a man's nature. We also know that after Robert's marriage to Cersei, he quickly began abusing and raping her. Question is, would he do the same to Lyanna had they been married? After all, Robert seemed to truly love Lyanna, and he never loved Cersei. Well, I think it can be assumed that Robert would have been cheating on Lyanna, considering that, well, he was cheating on her even after they were officially betrothed, and when he was fighting a literal war, supposedly in her name. In one of Arya's chapters, we meet Bella, who is Robert's bastard daughter. Bella is named after the Battle of the Bells that took place in the Stony Sept, so Robert was cheating even after he fought a war in Lyanna's name. Even after he believed that his beloved was kidnapped by Rhaegar. In fact, Robert actually loved the idea of Lyanna rather than her as she truly was. The woman tried to forbid me from fighting the melee. She's sulking in the castle now, down her. Your sister would never have shamed me like that. You never knew Lyanna as I did, Robert, Ned told him. You saw her beauty, but not the iron underneath. She would have told you that you have no business in the melee. So I believe that yes, had Robert and Lyanna been married, Robert would quickly grow disillusioned with her and yes, would probably start abusing her since Lyanna would have been much more willful than Cersei. What about Rhaegar though? Rhaegar met Lyanna when the iron underneath was well outside. Rhaegar met her after he witnessed her defending the honor of Holland, so he got details of true Lyanna, not the idealized version from Robert's mind. Lyanna herself likely did not love Robert back, so I believe she ran away with Rhaegar on her own volition because she did not want to marry Robert. And I believe that Rhaegar truly loved her. I have another source where George R.R. Martin is directly stating that Rhaegar was, quote, a love-strong prince. So, taking all of this into account, Rhaegar and Lyanna were in love. And now I have to address the elephant in the room. Rhaegar was around 24 years old, while Lyanna was around 16 years old when they ran away. That is an age gap that in contemporary times is unacceptable, though not really as uncommon as I would like it to be. Some people believe that this is why Rhaegar and Lyanna should not be romanticized, or that George R.R. Martin did not intend this to be a love story, but again, he did imply that it is a love story. Numerous times. He did write it as romantic, and the responsibility for that lies on him. Nothing stopped him from making them closer in age. I find it strange because people are very lenient towards George in that case, and they often tend to project their own morals onto him, that because they find this age gap unacceptable, he must think so too, and that's why Rhaegar and Lyanna cannot under any circumstances be a love story. Except this is neither the first nor the last canonical relationship with an age gap. Aegon and Daenerys were betrothed when she was 6 and he was 12. Sansa and Sandor have a clear romantic tension, even though she is 13 and he is in his late 20s. Tyrion in his late 20s lusts for 13-year-old Sansa, just to name few examples. Now, I don't care if you ship any of it, nor do I sentence you to a gulag if you do. I simply think that a good old Occam's razor is in place because some readers' own moral standards cloud what is clearly written in the story. They project their own moral values on a writer who clearly does not share them. He makes various love stories with age gaps that, in today's world, would be unacceptable, but are more alright in A Song of Ice and Fire, where people are considered adults at age 16. Not saying that this is okay, it's just that you need to sit down and realize that George is just fucking weird in that regard, and I doubt that he made such an age gap to specifically show us how evil Rhaegar was. I actually think that he did not take this into account at all. The author himself tells you that this was a love story. He even specifically commissioned Justin Sweet to do this calendar piece where Rhaegar and Lyanna have a very clear romantic vibe to them. Again, if you find this age gap unacceptable, fine, that's okay. Just realize that the author does not, and your beef is with him, not with words on page. This brings me to another point. I think we as readers do not give George R.R. Martin enough shit, and instead of recognizing the obvious flaws he has as a writer, we sort of assume that those flaws are actually intentionally narratively important to him. I feel like people are seriously more inclined to believe that we should have a beef with words on pages rather than with a person who wrote this relationship and is given such a grace when he simply is a flawed person and a writer who should be criticized and held accountable. Yet for some reason we direct our hatred on characters that we dislike rather than on him as a writer who, as I said, is simply flawed in that regard. And all of these weird age gaps and grown men lusting over little girls should absolutely be criticized for how it's written instead of applying a moral standard to the author that he does not really have. In the popular perception, Rhaegar was obsessed with prophecy, and many people are under a belief that this is why he kidnapped Lyanna. This is the vision Daenerys has in A Clash of Kings. Aegon, he said to a woman nursing a newborn babe in a great wooden bed. What better name for a king? Will you make a song for him? The woman asked. "He has a song," the man replied. "He is the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire." He looked up when he said it, and his eyes met Dany's. And it seemed as if he saw her, standing there beyond the door. "There must be one more," he said, though whether he was speaking to her or the woman in the bed, she could not say. "The dragon has 3 heads. It is known that Elia could not have any more children after she had 2, which makes people believe that the reason why Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna was because he needed a 3rd child. Then why wouldn't he just impregnate someone else? Why not take a paramour? Why plunge the realm into chaos just to have sex with a girl who is betrothed?" This reasoning stems from a false assumption that the prophecy Rhaegar was obsessed with caused him to wish to recreate Visenya as the 3rd head of the dragon, except there is absolutely nothing in the text to support it. It is one of the many misconceptions that are held fandom-wide that the recreation of Visenya needed to happen as the union of ice and fire, with Rhaegar representing fire and Lyanna ice, but again, where did this conception even come from? Nothing in Azor Ahai prophecy says anything about how the prince that was promised has to be born from the union of ice and fire. Moreover, at that point, Rhaegar was convinced that his son Aegon is the prince, so unless something changed his mind, he did not kidnap Lyanna because he wanted to recreate Visenya. And because Aegon and Rhaenys did not have to be a union of ice and fire, then why does Visenya have to be? I feel like this is a conflation of canon with the theory that, of course, the main male hero Jon Snow is the promised prince, because he has the right parentage, and that his birth is solely why Rhaegar ran away with Lyanna, but so far all evidence points to the fact that Rhaegar and Lyanna ran away together because they loved each other, and the prophecy might have influenced it to some degree, but not as much as we think. Another thing is that the abduction of Lyanna was not the direct reason for the start of the rebellion. It was what caused Brandon Stark to ride to the capital and demand Rhaegar's death. His father Rickard followed him, they were all executed by Aerys, and the war only truly started after the Mad King demanded that Jon Arryn send the heads of Robert and Ned too. Now this might be a bit controversial, but I don't think that Rhaegar could have predicted this order of events. There was a similar situation in his family after all, and it also involved a Targaryen prince, a Baratheon, and a girl descended from the first man. We talk of course about Jaime of Alton's Prince Duncan and his Baratheon betrothed. The Baratheons did rise up in revolt, but it was short-lived, solved by a betrothal and a trial by combat, so who is to say that Rhaegar did not expect it to end in much the same way? Not to mention that, at this point, Rhaegar himself likely planned a rebellion against his own father. Much of hatred towards Rhaegar comes from people who believe that he humiliated his wife Elia Martell. The reality is that we don't know what Elia thought about Rhaegar and Lyanna because Elia is a minor side character who died a long time ago and who exists as a plot device and a background to the story proper, much like Rhaegar and Lyanna themselves, though we know even less about her than about them. You can like her, you can write fanfics about her, create headcanons and speculate, but that does not change what is written in the story. I have searched every mention of Elia in the entire story and all of Saul Spark Martin entries on Elia, and nobody asked about what Elia thought about this entire situation. Maybe we will learn more about it in the following books, but as of now, we know that Elia and Rhaegar were clearly a marriage of convenience. They probably liked each other fine. Barristan says that Rhaegar was fond of Elia, but we can be certain that he had no love for her. And this brings me to another point, namely people blaming Rhaegar for the deaths of Elia and her children. Elia and Rhaegar actually spent most of their time on Dragonstone, away from the capital. The only reason why Elia, Rhaenys and Aegon were in King's Landing at that particular point was because Aerys wanted to keep them close against a possible Dornish betrayal. Aerys did not let them flee because he had convinced himself that the reason why Rhaegar died at the Trident is because Levin Martell betrayed him. The Lannisters had remained neutral up to this point, but right before the end of the war, Tywin's army appeared in front of the gates of King's Landing. Varys convinced Aerys to open the gates, with Aerys sure that Tywin had come to his rescue. In reality, Tywin started the sack of the city and ordered the deaths of Elia and her children, likely because he was still slighted that Aerys refused the match between Rhaegar and Cersei. Notice how at that point not only was Rhaegar dead, but also there is no way he could have predicted this order of events. He could not predict that the Lannister army would sack the city and that Tywin Lannister would specifically ask Gregor Clegane and Amory Lodge to brutally kill his wife and children. Tywin Lannister, Rhaegar Clegane and Amory Lodge are directly responsible for these tragedies, and may I remind you, everyone's favorite Bobby B smiled at their corpses. Given how despised Rhaegar is by most of the fandom, why is that almost every single character that mentions him has a positive opinion on him? The only character who expresses his hatred is Robert Baratheon, but other than that, very different people in very different circumstances have nothing but praise for him. Cersei praises him. Dany is frequently compared to Rhaegar, and it is always in positive context. Ned Stark curiously never thinks a bad word about Rhaegar, even though he supposedly kidnapped and raped his beloved sister, and Ned even believes that Rhaegar likely did not frequent brothels. Barristan, disguised as Arstan, tells Dany that Rhaegar is still loved in Westeros. Barristan also thinks that Rhaegar would make a great king. The reasons why Rhaegar is hated can broadly be distinguished into 4 main reasons. 1. He is a Targaryen and some people in this fandom have an unexplained hate boner towards this family. 2. They have a strange obsession with a minor character we know very little about, and they began mixing their headcanons with canon. 3. They specifically hate and despise Daenerys Targaryen, so they hate Rhaegar by association. And 4. Illiteracy. I have already explained that strong feelings about Rhaegar's cheating on Elia are a bit unwarranted, considering that we don't really know her opinion on the whole deal, and she is not really that important in the grand scheme of things. Not that I think that what happened to her wasn't terrible, but she is just a minor character from many years ago. Is it that serious? And why is it Rhaegar who gets all the blame for what happened to Elia, considering that it wasn't possible for him to predict? And why is that only Rhaegar gets such a scrutiny when many other characters who are beloved by the fandom say unfavorable things about Elia? Jon Con says that Elia was unworthy of Rhaegar. Barristan calls her a kitchen drop compared to Ashara Dane. Robert Baratheon smiled at her corpse and the corpses of her children. Additionally, Cersei thinks that she was ugly and that she would have been a better wife to him, and Tywin and the Lannisters are directly responsible for the atrocities that befallen her. The visceral hatred towards House Targaryen and a subsequent paradox of how, at the same time, everyone wants their favorite characters to be like Targaryens is something that I would like to keep for another video, but I think that the biggest component of this hatred is Daenerys, and that it is from her that all other problems come from. See, Dany is constantly compared to Rhaegar, and it is always done in positive light, and that of course directly contradicts any Mad Queen, evil, tyrant, fascist, Barbie theories they have, and hating Rhaegar is an extension of that. Because if Rhaegar turns out to be evil, then of course Daenerys is evil too. Also, people of course mix up their own headcanons with canon, but another thing they do is mix their theories with canon. First is more of a terminal Tumblr brain case, and the second one is more of a Reddit bro territory. But I was able to prove that there is no such thing as Rhaegar wanting to recreate Visenya. He was simply in love with Lyanna, and that love was doomed, and doomed love is something incredibly compelling. Something that we as culture adored for centuries. So, why should we not simply treat it as such instead of creating some convoluted theories? And why do we have more scrutiny towards a non-existent guy rather than the person who wrote him? Thank you for your attention. As you probably know, making more video essays was not something that I had originally planned, but it seems like I'm doing it right now, and I still ask you for suggestions as to what I should talk about. This video was not really suggested by anyone, I just continue on my streak of destroying various misconceptions that people have, and I could no longer stand this whole recreating Visenya thing. This channel is very much a work in progress. I hope we will have more fun in the future and that you will join me in some growth that I hope to have. Also remember that if you have video suggestions or other things I could improve, then I am very open to any of them.